We are all somewhat disillusioned with the major political parties in this country. Every vote you make can make a difference, as we saw the minority balance in the federal election come 2010. Tonight we're taking a look at some very interesting minor parties.
The primary support for the Labor Party and the Liberal Party has generally declined over the years. That's why we've had the proliferation of minor parties. 38 minor parties registered with the Australian Electoral Commission at the moment. Could be 46, 47 within a month or two. So there is a proliferation of people who aren't happy with what's happening.
The people are spoiled for choice this year with 30 new parties registering as of last week. So it shows that not only is society upset, society is reacting and saying we're going to take part in the democratic process and show the major parties that they can't hold power forever, especially when they start treating Australian citizens as if their vote doesn't actually matter.
So what we've done tonight is we've got a number of people out here from smaller parties to show people there is a choice, there's a diversity of opinion out there, and you don't have to choose between one or the other of the two major parties.
Can I say in the positive what the WikiLeaks Party is? This is a party which believes in transparency and accountability. This is a party which is not simply a one-trick pony, as some of its opponents have sought to characterise it. It is a party which is developing a suite of policies in relation to justice, in relation to accountability by security agencies in Australia, and in relation to economic policy and social policy. It is a party which believes that individuals in our society have fundamental rights and that those rights ought to be respected. It also believes that the state, which has a role in society and a positive role in society, oversteps the mark on far too many occasions. If the WikiLeaks Party were elected to the Senate, and if the WikiLeaks Party were a party which had the balance of power, there would be a deliberation not based on special deals and rent-seeking and pleading from interest groups, whether they be on one side or the other, but it would be public policy that's based on a rational basis and a rational discussion.
Look, I don't think enough people are looking at minor parties, but there's no doubt that people are dissatisfied with business as usual in Australia.
I think the two-party system, there's so much, they're peas in a pod these days, so there's no differentiation from it, and people are really sick and tired of that. We've become a much more diverse culture as well, and that's not reflected by the two parties. There's still predominantly middle-aged men in grey suits.
So we're a policy-driven democratic party. We focus on considered evidence-based policy and we take democratic votes on it, so each policy has to be ratified by the majority of the party to be adopted. As a party that has developed in a tech-oriented society, we're looking at new ways of developing policy. So instead of basically making the current form of democracy faster and just as corrupt, we're looking at ways of filling that span of time with more conducive discussion. So we're looking at ways of using technology to make a more deliberative democracy.
I do think that a lot of Australian people don't feel that the major parties really represent Australia and are batting for them enough. You know, I think that, there's 22 million people here in Australia. Sometimes you feel like they're just governing for a small group of Australians and not for all Australians. And I think that's why we are seeing people looking for alternatives. They're joining Get Up, they're voting for the minor parties, they're listening to WikiLeaks, they're talking about that sort of stuff because they want to have a better choice. They don't want to be shoehorned into choosing between, Pepsi and Coke.
I think the major parties have failed to connect with young voters, and I think one of the problems is a lot of young people don't vote. They don't register to vote, and this I think is quite alarming. And
principally what brings me here with a sense of urgency, as I said, is the issue of climate change. Whether you like it or not, whether you think it's crap or not, whether you believe that we are responsible or not, we are. The weather is changing, it's becoming angrier around us. This is now the age of climate change, and this is not something that our kids and grandkids are going to need to take responsibility for and deal with. This is upon us right now. So we know that the tide is turning in some way against progressive voices, which is why it's so important that we get together here tonight. We are seeing a pretty heavy tide and shift towards the conservative side of politics, but events like tonight give me hope.
If we want to make the Senate a true house of review, then voting for the people up here would certainly assist in that.
It is fundamentally important that the Parliament return to doing what it is meant to do, and that is, as I said earlier, to be a check on the executive.
A central theme of our election campaign is a qualitative redistribution of wealth. And that is, we are proposing that we need in this country to bring the resource sector and banks and energy distribution and major energy supply into democratic public ownership. We don't just propose it out of some kind of nostalgic, ideological nostalgia. We believe it is just not credible to propose that we as a society will be able to reorganise our economy such that we will be able to bring down our carbon emissions sufficient to stop runaway global warming without extending public ownership into those strategic sectors of our economy.
Look, I think the major parties do have to revamp their policies.
Key message for us is that this election, if you're fed up with the major parties, so are we. Fortunately, there's plenty of choice.
Our party is a civil libertarian party, a secular party, a new party and a very young party. But we think that, there is a place for us in Parliament, in federal Parliament, to provide that voice on a lot of those civil libertarian issues and to grow on other issues like data retention, which I know Scott's been passionate about, and obviously censorship. But other areas that the party is really interested in is drug law reform. We think that if you could tax and regulate drugs like cannabis, you would have a much healthier community, you would have far less people in jail, and you would have much better education about drugs. We also want to consider the tax exemption of churches and religion. There's a conservative estimate that if churches and their related businesses were paying the appropriate tax, that we'd be looking in the means of about an extra $20 billion in the budget.
So this is not necessarily going to be the Coke-Pepsi election. We came here tonight to talk about the value of crossbenchers, the value of diversity in Parliament.
The key message is that we are losing our civil liberties in Australia and that we need that voice of reason.
But the fact that the major parties have converged and that there's not as much of a difference between them as they might like you to think.
So we believe in a truly democratic democracy in Australia, a multi-party democracy.
Our experience is that it's not too hard to convince people that the state of the world, the state of politics in Australia is wrong. But the difficult thing is convincing people that you can do something about it.
It's very hard for small parties to get any recognition and to get any media attention.
What I say to people when explaining our campaign is that you can't fight Coke with Diet Coke.
With the federal election fast approaching, you need to start thinking about your vote. You need to do the research and have a discussion. What issues are important to you and your family, and who represents you best? Every time you cast your vote, it matters. This has been Jackie O'Leary reporting for Undercurrent.